everyone, welcome to this video, and today I'm covering a subject which is hardly ever mentioned but is so important to getting those nice tattoo lines and shade, and that subject being hand speed versus machine speed. Now with this video, as the same as a lot of my other ones, I built it in easy to understand blocks of information which build on the previous ones as you go along. So I strongly recommend that you don't skip any part of this video, set 10 minutes aside, watch it in its entirety, but especially more in this video because at the end of this one I'm going to ask you a question which I get asked a lot on YouTube, and it's kind of like the holy grail of questions, and hopefully at the end of this video I've done a good enough job at explaining everything and you can actually answer the question before I give you the answer. As always guys, let me know what you think of this video, drop your comments in the box below. With all that said, let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. Okay guys, so let's first start with the basics and actually look at what hand and machine speed actually are. Now the machine speed is measured in a thing called cycles per second, or CPS. Now the cycles per second are when the needle is travelling from its most upright position down to its most downward position and then back up to its most upright position. This is known as one cycle. So if the needle was to go down and up in 1 second, then the machine would be considered to be running at 1 cycle per second. If the needle was to travel down and up 10 times a second, then the machine would be considered to be running at 10 cycles per second, and so on. Now the average CPS for a liner machine is around about 130 cycles per second, and the average CPS for a shade or colour packer machine is around about 100 cycles per second. Now these are rough ballpark figures, and some people tattoo faster than that, some people tattoo slower than that. I do cover cycles per second a lot more in depth in another video on how to tune your coil machine, so if you haven't seen that already, I'll put a card up on the screen and you can click that after you've watched this video and watch that one. Now hand speed is exactly what it says on the tin, and it's literally the speed at which you move your tattoo machine along the skin whilst you're tattooing. So now we know what the hand speed and machine speed are. In this next section we're going to look at what happens when they both work together. So in this example we've got our tattoo machine and it's ready to pull a line on the skin. But before we do that, let's imagine every time the needle penetrates the skin, it makes a little dot of ink. Now in essence, what we're aiming for is for all these dots that we make to be lined up perfectly next to each other, which aren't going to be overlapping or spaced out, but instead just all in unison, making a nice line of dots. And it's for this reason that the hand speed and the machine speed are so important, that they work together with each other in unison. So now we're going to start tattooing. We're going to massively exaggerate the speed of the machine and slow it right down so we can see exactly what's going on in the skin. Now this is an example of when the hand speed and the machine speed are working in perfect unison with each other, and you can see as the needle leaves the skin and it's made that dot, the hand is pulling it across the skin, and just as the tip's lined up to do the next dot of ink, the needle penetrates the skin, leaving the dot right next to the previous one. Now if the machine speed and the hand speed wasn't working in unison with each other, you wouldn't get this nice pattern of dots which are all placed perfectly next to each other. So this is what happens when the hand speed and the machine speed work together with each other. So in this next section, let's look at when the hand and the machine speed don't work together. So we've seen the perfect line which we can pull when the hand and the machine speed are running in unison with each other. So in this example, we're going to look at what happens when the hand speed is moving too quick for the machine speed. And as you can see, instead of getting these nicely lined up dots of ink forming a nice crispy line, what's happening is we're getting big gaps and spacers in the ink, and this is because we're moving the hand across the skin way too quick for the machine to be able to place those dots of ink nicely lined up next to each other like in the previous example. Now if this was to be tattooed on human skin, the result of this would most likely be a weak looking line, a line which looks pitted, and just overall poor quality. Now in this example I've just said that the hand speed is moving too quick for the machine, but you could argue on the opposite side of this argument that the hand speed isn't moving too quick, but the machine speed is moving too slow, and both arguments would be right. And this is where the tattooist's personal preference really starts coming into play. Now in a lot of my videos I do mention, you know, tattooing is a very personal thing, it's a very personal preference, and probably no two tattooists tattoo exactly the same way as each other, and that's because there's so many variables. And it's exactly the same with this argument. Is the hand speed too quick or is the machine speed too slow? And that's something you as a tattooist has to find yourself what works most comfortable for you. But I will give you some pointers towards the end of this video of how to achieve that right balance which works for you. So now we've seen a hand speed which is too fast. Let's now look at an example where hand speed is too slow. So you can see when the machine starts to tattoo, this time instead of the dots being nicely lined up against each other to pull that perfect line, they're actually starting to overlap onto each other. Now if this was to be tattooed on human skin, the result would most likely be the skin getting chewed up by the needle. So ultimately what you're going to end up with is a client with a massive scab, maybe a weeping tattoo. If you're lining, you could end up with really red, raised up, irritated skin. And there's a term that gets thrown around a lot in tattoo world. People call it burger meat, and this is a prime example of when you turn someone's skin into burger meat, is when your hand isn't moving quick enough for the machine and you're basically pounding the same area with the needle, and at best you're going to end up with a really poor looking tattoo, and at worst you might even end up with a scar. And again with this example, there's two sides to this argument. Is the hand speed moving too slow across the skin, or is the machine running too fast? And exactly the same as the other example, it all comes down to personal preference, and for the tattooist to work out whether the hand speed is too slow or whether the machine is running too fast. So in this next section, I'm going to give you a few pointers to decide for yourself whether you need to adjust your hand speed or your machine speed. So let's say you're tattooing and your lines don't look good, or your shade doesn't look good, you know, and it's weak or it's patchy or it's irritating the skin or whatever, but it's not good, and you know that your machine speed and your hand speed are not working in sync with each other, and you want to decide whether to adjust your machine speed or your hand speed. So here's a few pointers to help you decide which one you want to adjust. So let's for example say you pull a line and your hand speed seems to be too fast and your line quality is quite weak. To help us make the correct decision, we can use this flowchart which I put together, and also feel free to screenshot this as well if it helps you out. So before we get into it, I'm going to assume that the needle depth is correct, and I'm also going to assume that you've got the correct stretch. So this brings us down to ink quality. So with example 1, the line we've just pulled, it's weak and patchy. So we'll look at our flowchart for ink quality and go to patchy and weak. So the first thing we need to look at is our average CPS set for what we've just pulled. So we've just pulled a line and we know our average CPS should be around about 130 cycles per second. So let's say you look at your power pack and you're nowhere near 130 cycles per second. Let's say it's like 80 or something like that. So if it's not set to the average CPS, then the first thing we need to do is change the CPS to bring the machine up to speed. So now the CPS has been changed and our ink is still patchy. We come to the next decision. Is our hand speed comfortable? Now what I mean by that is, if you're feeling rushed when you're pulling a line across the skin and you feel like your hand's going so fast that you can't be very accurate with the needle, then obviously you're not comfortable with your hand speed. So ultimately, if that is the case and you're not happy with your hand speed, you're not comfortable with it, then I'd suggest decrease your hand speed. But let's say you are really comfortable with the hand speed and you feel it is a nice comfortable speed that you're pulling the machine across the skin, then I'd suggest for this example 1 for weak patchy ink, increase your CPS, which is increasing your cycles per second of your needle. So let's now look at example 2. So in this example, you're pulling the machine across the skin and you notice that the skin's just being chewed up, the ink's all messy. This is probably going to lead to a big scab on the skin and the skin hardly taking any ink and possibly the skin excessively bleeding. So again, we refer to our flowchart. We're assuming that we've got the correct depth, we've got the correct stretch. So we look at ink quality. So this time the ink quality is messy and the skin's chewed up. So again, the first thing we need to check is, are we in the average ballpark figure for the CPS? If we're not, then the chances are if you're getting chewed up messy skin, then the machine might be running too fast. So we'll reduce our CPS to bring it down to the average ballpark level which we're aiming for. Again, if we were lining, we'll probably be aiming for around 130 cycles per second. If we're colour packing or shading, probably around about the 100 marker. So now we've changed our CPS, but we're still getting chewed up messy skin. We ask the question, are we comfortable with our hand speed? Now let's say you're not comfortable with your hand speed and you feel like the reason that the skin's being chewed up is because the needle's just hammering the skin far too much because your hand is too slow. And in this case, I'd suggest that you increase your hand speed. But let's say you are really comfortable with your hand speed and you don't feel like this is an issue, but you're still chewing up the skin and the ink's all messy, then I'd suggest that you decrease your cycles per second. So basically slow your machine down. So now we've covered everything about hand and machine speed, how do we actually know that our hand speed and machine speed are working in perfect unison with each other? Well, in this next section, I'm going to show you. So knowing when your hand speed and machine speed are working in unison with each other and in perfect harmony with each other isn't that hard to do. We already know if you're pulling a line or if you're shading and the skin's looking really red and angry and raised and it's just chewing up the skin, then the chances are your hand speed is either too slow or your machine speed is too high. So we can adjust either or accordingly to counteract this. We also know if you're pulling a line and it looks really weak and pitted, then the chances are your hand speed is too fast or your machine speed is too slow. And again, we can adjust either of these to counteract this. Now, another really important factor into nailing your hand and machine speed every single time sounds really obvious, and I suppose it is really obvious, but it's basically just practicing. You've heard the term practice makes perfect, and in this case it really is. And it's practicing so you reach the level, without sounding too pretentious about it, where you become one with your machine. And you'll reach a stage where you're so comfortable with your machine, you'll just know automatically whether your hand's running too quick, your machine's running too slow, your machine's running too quick, your hand's running too slow. You'll just know because you'll get a feel for it on the skin. You'll constantly be checking your work, looking for clues, looking for that skin, see if it's overworked, looking for those patchy lines, and you'll just be able to adjust on the fly even without giving it a second thought. You'll just be able to react to it and adjust accordingly. Now obviously there's loads more factors involved to pulling that perfect line or laying down that nice soft shade. Needle depth is one. I cover this in another video. I'll stick a card up on the screen if you haven't seen it, and I'll go really in depth into explaining exactly which layer of the skin that you should be tattooing at. There's also factors like the correct stretch, quality equipment, correctly tuned machine. All these factors are basically small pieces of the puzzle which all need to come together in unison with each other to lay down that quality work on the skin. So in this next final section coming up, I've got a question I'm going to ask you, and it's just basically for a little bit of fun, and I'm going to see if you can answer the question before I actually give you the answer, and it's just to see really if all this video has made sense to you and you fully understand about hand and machine speed. Okay guys, so one of the most common questions that I get asked on YouTube is, what voltage should I run my machine at? And you'll probably see this question being asked a lot on tattoo forums as well. Hey guys, cool machine, what voltage are you running at? So just doing a super quick recap of what we've just watched. We know if you're pulling a line and it's really weak, then the chances are your hand speed is too quick or your machine speed is too slow. And vice versa, if you're chewing the skin up, your hand speed is too slow or your machine speed is too fast. So now we fully understand about hand speed and machine speed. I'm new to tattooing and I want to know, what voltage should I run my machine at? Because I want to run my machine at that speed. The answer to the question of what voltage do you run your machine at is, it all depends on your hand speed. So hopefully you can understand now that asking the question of what voltage someone runs their machine at is in essence a question which isn't really going to help you. But my machine runs at 10 volts because it matches my hand speed for my style of tattooing. Now if you was to run your machine at 10 volt and you've got a different hand speed to mine, then you might chew the skin up, your line might look weak. So it's down to you as a tattooist to personally find your balance of hand speed versus machine speed to pull those perfect lines. So next time you do see that question, if it's on the internet or on a forum or anywhere, and someone says, hey, what voltage do I run this machine at? You can answer that question by saying, it all depends on your hand speed and everybody is different. If you did get that question right, guys, hit that like button and let me know, because I'd be really interested to see if my explanation of this video has fully communicated across to you guys as subscribers. If you did like this video, guys, it means so much to me if you just hit that like button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you've already subscribed, it's really important to hit that notification bell and you can stay up to date with all my latest uploads. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.